going on YouTube? How happy Friday to all of y'all. This is your boy Sean, aka Puff Comics 83, and I am joined by my friend, my co-host, my everyday buddy when it comes to talking these movies, Varangian Vigilante, who is blacked out the screen. There's a reason for that, and it's not his camera.
Yeah, it's not the camera. It's I was at the dentist, and I should say my left eye is a little bit swollen, and yeah, I'm on ibuprofen and paracetamol now, so it's gonna be interesting. But of course, I didn't want to miss the stream, but at least you got my voice.
Yeah, and it's a great voice, man. Can't deny that.
Oh yeah, it's the great tonic tongue.
So today we're going to talk about a very interesting film that has gained traction over the last couple years. It's been registered in the Library of Congress as a film that's important, and a film that was very controversial, when it released in 1973, and that's The Spook Who Sat by the Door, directed by Ivan Dixon, and written by Sam Greenlee, who is also based on the novel that he did, was released in 1969, which also had a troubled history when it comes to its publishing. So I want to say shout out to Kenneth Bird. What's going on?
Hey, Kenneth.
Thanks for joining. K-pop junkie, what's up, Kate?
Hey, K-pop.
So I want to say that this movie was brought to my attention when Black Media Man Cave on YouTube did a review on it during his Black History Month, and I was like, I've heard of the book and I've heard references to the movie, but I never really sat down and watched the film. And after watching his video, I wanted to watch it because this is one of those films that they label as blaxploitation, but it's not really a blaxploitation film when you really look at the whole scope of the film. It has a much more political charge behind it, and there's nothing about drugs and stuff. Like, they mention drugs, but it's not the central theme of the film. So it's one of those movies that got lost within the tapestry of time because they try and label it a blaxploitation film, but it's really not. And then it had a short window of release because it was released on September 21st, 1973. And within 2 weeks, it was yanked from the theaters because of the controversial subject matter of the film.
Yeah, you shouldn't be right when the state is wrong. It's a classic mistake.
And, for years, this movie has kind of went unnoticed until actor Tim Reed found negative copies of the film, the original transfer, and was able to put it out on DVD through his production studio. And that's when people started realizing this film was, existed. Some people remembered the film for its short run. Robert Thompson did, because he talked about it in one of the Spook videos that I shared with you, VV. And it started gaining a lot more traction now, and people are talking about the film a bit more. And this year, it came out in 1973. This year represents its 50th anniversary. So 50 years that this movie had existed, and it's finally gaining more and more momentum.
Yeah, it's probably not getting a 50 years anniversary edition by Criterion.
Sadly not. But if it did, then I'd probably buy it quick before because they probably have limited copies of it.
Yeah. I think this is a movie where it should be released with a book with additional reading, with additional essays. It's very interesting since what I also told you on Instagram is that, of course, like, personally as European, I really dislike American patriotic movies. But it's very interesting that this movie basically turns this movie around, where basically the U.S. America, the law enforcement, the soldiers, etc., are portrayed as very effectless, it's very weak, etc. Usually, that's also the reason why I'm not watching a lot of American war movies, because how they portray German soldiers, like it's a little
one-sided. It's
yeah,
one-sided.
it's very one-sided. Like, I totally get if you don't like the politics, but like at least honor like a soldier, the soldiers. So I think it's very interesting, since it's a black nationalist movie, and it's like the antithesis of The Birth of a Nation, basically.
When you said that, I had me thinking about that, because Birth of a Nation it's a controversy film, but it's also a legendary film,
and very important for historic, of course, that too.
Yeah.
So I see a lot of similarities there. Is I think if you show like The Birth of a Nation, I think you also have to talk about this movie, because it's two different sides of the same coin in the same country.
And the funny thing is, Birth of a Nation is like, as black people, we just can't stomach that film, because of
Understandably,
of the Ku Klux Klan, and
yeah,
like you said, like there's this heroic stance in the film, and you have white people portraying blacks and blackface. It's like very offensive.
Yeah.
But it was a historic film for its time. But you also need a film like this that is that antithesis of it.
Exactly. So it's also I totally get if like white Protestant Americans would watch it and get the same way triggered like a black person would be when they watch The Birth of a Nation. So it's like also like equal justice.
And the movie is very politically charged.
Yes.
We try to like skirt the line when it comes to politics, because one thing about politics is that it's a never-ending pitfall of argument.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that I try and avoid on my channel, because talking politics is never a good thing when it comes to arguing with people. And it's like we're really arguing for nothing, because nothing is going to change from our standpoint. We're just going to defend what we defend and argue what we want to argue, and there's really no gain from it, because nothing really going to affect us.
Yeah, especially I can totally understand the frustration of black people in America, because it's like, what are the choices? Like, either side is using you as a pawn for votes, and this is something that the movie portrays like very well, which is basically the starting point of the movie, where like a liberal mayor, for being like revoted, he needed, I think so, 2% of votes or something, so he can get re-elected. And it's like, well, I need those black votes. Of course, he's not saying black.
Yeah, they be catching themselves. Like they gotta watch what they say.
Yeah. So he's like, then somebody tells me, oh, there's no black person like in the CIA, and he's like, how is he gonna use this and criticize the CIA to get those votes?
And it's like, it's so petty, because it's like,
yeah,
your whole regime is based on the rules you set, which was even mentioned in the movies. Like, yeah, those law rules you set, like, that didn't go over well with the black community. But now you want to deflect that law system that you set up and say, oh, the CIA ain't got no black people, in within it. So, let's criticize them and put them on blast. And it's such a politician way of thinking. They always like to deflect blame and put blame on somebody else instead of looking at themselves in the mirror.
Yeah. I am a monarchist, and so I don't have the best opinion about democracy, since I think this is one of the key failings of democracy, is that every person that is voted in office only thinks as far as being re-elected, and they don't have like a long-term plan for the prosperity of a country. While if of course you have like if you know that your son follows like your rule, you have way more interest in having a prosperity for the country in the long term, and you think in projects of decades instead of like, oh, just like fix something for 4 years to get re-elected, and then everything can fall apart.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like they always think short term, and then say, "Well, I'll do this in my second term." I'm like, bro, there's no guarantee
Yeah,
of a second term.
it's
Okay?
like it's like setting up like a sequel in the first movie, where like it's like first have success with the first movie. Yeah, but yeah. Then we get introduced, of course, to the protagonist.
Well, before we get that, we get introduced to all the black men that are going through the process of becoming that one black face to be representative of the CIA. You know, because all they want is one. And they don't even really want that one. They don't really want that one. But because of the whole mandate now, oh, we need a black person in CIA to say that we integrated, we're diversified. You know, so you get all these black men, they all gotta go through the tests, the training, and all that, and you only getting one. And it's like that's a lot of brothers that's getting cut just for one position. And it's like a competition between those guys.
Yeah, and it's they all have a very realistic view in it, so you know they only want one token black guy. They even mention it like that. This is, I think, this is one of the parts of the movie I think that is a little bit underdeveloped. I've read a little bit into the synopsis of the novel. I didn't have time to read the novel, so I just got the synopsis. Where I think it's really interesting, so you know more the backstory, especially about the protagonist. You know how he served in Korea and how he formed this opinion. Which is a little bit later unfolded in the movie, but I think this is like this process could have even been 1/3 of the movie.
And considering, you know, what the budget they have for the film and the lack of permits and stuff, they probably want to just at least try and get the main bullet points of the book.
Yeah.
Without trying to, overcomplicate things by trying to really, because I think it does a fantastic job with what they were given, and it really, like I said earlier, I really want to read the book now to get more of the larger scope of what the author was telling this story, because Dan Freeman is a very interesting character from how he's presented from the beginning of the movie towards the end.
Yeah, he plays it very well, since most of the times he's very good at masquerading himself and not letting shine through his true goals. He's playing it there very stoic. The only times when he really gets emotional, which also is like the weakness that he has, is of course when a woman is around.
And it definitely like showed in that scene, which we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
But I love how his character at the beginning is in the background. Like all the other brothers are like excited that they have this opportunity to become a spy or a spook, and he's just in the background, just observing, listening, and really just focusing on what he got to do to make his chances better than everybody else's.
He already mentions this later, like the tactic where he says basically that the white people in America ignore a black man when he's like in working clothes, and he's also invisible to them when he smiles.
Exactly. When you carry a mop and a bucket, and you're invisible when you're smiling, because all they see you as is a janitor.
Yeah.
So he uses you as a threat.
So he uses that tactic to be as invisible as possible, since this is exactly what they want with this token.
And you look at like all the civil rights leaders in the 60s, the ones that was very charismatic, the ones that can speak articulate and that were intelligent and that can galvanize the people, you're a target to the FBI
Yep.
because they see you as a biggest threat to their system. And
Yeah.
he saw himself like, I need to be reserved, that let me be in the background and I set things up around me without being seen and without being noticed.
Yeah, it's a really good way how he shows how to use a bias to his own advantage.
And
Hey, Jeff.
What's up, Jeff? I'll be seeing him tomorrow because we'll be hanging out tomorrow in Tampa. Tomorrow will be Jace's birthday, my brother, so it's going to be a fun time hanging out with the guys tomorrow.
Nice.
Now I do like the whole thing with the use of the word Tom, the Uncle Tom.
Yeah.
Now I talked about a book, Uncle Tom's Cabin, and written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. It's been a long time since I read that book, but I've been going through it again, and the whole thing with the Uncle Tom is interesting because that's like a derogatory term towards a black person to say, oh, he's kissing up to the white man. He's doing everything that the white man tell him. And one of the characters in the film sees Dan Freeman as that. Like, why are you such a Tom? Because he's so humble and so doing things the right way that he sees him as like, oh, you think you can kiss up your way to get to the job? Why can't you just hang out with us? And there's that divide between them. He has one mission set in his mind while the others like, hey, we gonna go hang out in the town. Why don't you join us? And he's like, no, I'm gonna keep doing my studies and I'm gonna keep doing what I need to do to get this position.
Yeah, because the author Sam Greenlee, he didn't have the best view on the black middle class, and I think like these people like portray like the middle class, so they don't come out too well also in the movie adaptation. But you can totally see how Dan Freeman uses like all these biases like to his advantage, and this is a very interesting point in general. And I think this is also why the book and the movie are very, very, very much on the list of the FBI, like to get rid of it, or do not even publish it in the US. It has to be published in the UK, is because it's not only like a thriller, it's not only a story, but within the story there is a guide for guerrilla warfare within inner cities. So if you read it, basically it's also like an instruction how to be like an enemy of the state.
And that's the thing, they saw it as a massive threat, especially coming after the civil rights era. Where they you had your Martin Luther Kings, you had your Malcolm X, you had your Fred Hamptons and the Black Panther Party. Like, they were trying so hard to make sure that no new leaders was being created in the 70s. And this movie was a threat to them because it gives young black men the idea that if you do this, you can probably follow these rules and guidelines, because the rules and guidelines the CIA set up for the training that he used to train his gang, the gang members in Chicago, is like, it is strict and it is on point. Like, though you do not want those guidelines falling into the wrong hands.
Yeah, that's like, that's the reason why the FBI and CIA fights terrorism, because they don't like any competition.
Yeah, and they don't like threats to the hierarchy of the social order.
Yeah.
And that's the one thing I remember taking a class about, oppression and the whole civil rights movement. And I learned a lot of stuff that school never taught you. They gloss over a lot of things because they don't want that history being put.
Yeah, that's a thing with school worldwide. This is like very similar here, where we are also getting a very one-sided view of history. Also mostly thanks to Uncle Sam.
Yeah, and it's sad that you got to do outside research. It's good, because again, another point that the movie brings up is education and reading. We talked about this last week with Ghost Dog and how it's important to read and educate yourself and learn about different philosophies, because it comes back and it helps you be more smarter, more cognitive to your thought patterns when it comes to taking advantages of certain situations like this.
Exactly, yeah. I think it would be also interesting if the movie would have gone a little bit more into history, especially since the situation, and this is like my outside view, what I've learned about American history, and also having studied history, is that ever since the Civil War, that like I said, it's that either side, either party used black people as pawn for their own interests. So they only stated to have an interest in their agendas as long as they were aligned, and later dropped them the moment they had the chance. So it's completely understanding why there is a frustration, since you're like also citizens, and but you're not treated like equal citizens. So it's completely understandable that there is a lot of frustration. There's also like a lot of hate growing, and I think this movie shows it very well, also like both sides. From the protagonist, you have the view of black nationalism. You have the goal to create your own state, which like your own ethno state. But of course, you also have another very interesting character, Dawson, who is working in the police force, and he says like he sees this movement as something that brings the black position back many decades. So it's a very interesting discussion. Like I said, I haven't read the novel, but in the movie, it's a discussion, it seems like, on equal terms. So it's like to let the viewer decide, which maybe was also done like to not get the movie banned.
Dawson is an interesting character in itself, because he is a black man who is a cop. And we know the history between the black folks in the community and the police. And James Baldwin, I remember one quote, I've always remembered it, and it stayed in my head, where he said, if you have the opportunity, if you have to call the police, make sure it's a white one, because if it's a black one, that could be even worse, because of once a black person become a cop, they fall in line with the institution that has been built already, and the gun and the badge just give them the power to do what they have to do to please their superiorities. And Dawson is that person, that character that's caught in between of trying to be a great cop, but at the same time trying to satisfy his community.
Yeah. And
the community is going through a lot of strife with the police, and we see in the movie there's a riot involved. They send mostly white cops. There's a couple of black cops in there, but it's mostly white. And then even when the National Guard come in, he even says they're all white, which is even worse, because in the situation that you're in, he's like, nah, how can I manage this community when racial tensions is at an all-time high, and I'm caught in the crossfire? And then you have Freeman trying to sway him onto his side as a way to be a spy inside the police unit. And I thought that was fantastic. Like, I need to read more of that, because I thought that was a fantastic element to saying, I'm going to build this guerrilla warfare, but I'm going to try and get all sides covered and have informants in all different locations. And trying to play Dawson into his side is a hot commodity of a topic that should have been further explored.
Yeah, like in the terms of tactics, you need to have that in order to have like a long-lasting success, and to really you have to hollow out an institution before it can crumble.
Yeah, so I thought that like his character was fascinating, and the thing about this movie is I just love how it keeps growing and growing in terms of building more intriguing and interesting character dynamics. He has the character of Dan Freeman, played by the awesome Lawrence Cook. We gotta mention his name. Fantastic actor. I really wish we saw him in more roles, but this movie kind of like put him in a bad limelight with Hollywood, so they didn't cast him. But he has a girlfriend in the film called, her name is Joy. And one thing that I watched when I watched this a couple of times, I said to myself, he deliberately let her go because he knew that if he would be tied to her, that it will be an issue with him going forward trying to set up this movement.
It's every person that is near to you, family members, girlfriend, etc., of course, wife, become targets.
Yes. And not only he didn't want her as a target, but he didn't want her to be on his mind when he's doing this movement. Like now, like he'll be a friend, but he's like, I'm all about pulling this off and focusing on building this guerrilla warfare team.
Exactly. There's also one of the studies that has shown, with women in the army, it's not that a woman would be less of a soldier. And of course, a woman can be a fantastic soldier, or like history has shown that. But it can be very dangerous in situations. And this was something that I think was shown in Israel when Palestinian fighters shot like a woman and left her wounded. Lot more men tried to rescue her than they would have done if there would be a man laying wounded. And so it's very important, I think, like in this situation, that he did that because, his mind would be occupied otherwise.
Exactly. And I like that it was more deliberate. Like he had no hard feelings because he knew that he had his goal set. So yeah, go ahead and marry the doctor.
And also, prostitute price is $15.
Hey, it's the funny thing about her. This is why the FBI, CIA is so dangerous, because you never know when you're being spied on.
Yep.
And even when the brothers was talking after the whole meeting with the lead guy, and he left, they talking to each other and stuff like we're gonna be spies and stuff like that. They're being listened to, and I like Dan Freeman picks that up when the brother came and talked to them, and he said, "Yeah, they could be listening to us, so you better not talk about Whitey like that." So, what's up, G-Man?
Hey, G-Man.
Congratulations on your Xbox, man. I know you've been running for a long time.
Console peasant.
But yeah, I love that whole conversation, with the prostitute, because he's trying to like instill some pride into her, African pride. You're a queen, and she ain't buying it at first, but then she starts to listen to him more, and she understands him. And when the FBI guy was talking to her, because they mentioned like, hey, what did Freeman do? He's like, yeah, he went over to the ghetto and got with a prostitute. So they're like, yeah, let's investigate that. She told him straight up, like, yeah, he's a humble guy, but even the brothers in the ghetto knew not to mess with him because he's feared.
This is also a very important point that the movie shows, is that he didn't only like later teach like the street gang, the Cobras, like guerrilla warfare, but he also knew the importance to have an ideology. Like you said, you have to read, like you have to inform yourself, with your African roots and everything. So this is very important. This is something that today very often gets it's like forgotten, or like people maybe they don't want to do it because of course it has been used in certain ways in history, But if your soldiers like also know what they're fighting for, they're way more effective than people that are just being paid or don't even want to fight.
And speaking of reading, one of my favorite scenes, and I'm just gonna say this joke right out from the start because I can't hold it in. Willie will be the number one pick of the black delegation in the racial draft because I'm watching this character and I'm like, this dude really think he's black, and and I know from experience, of growing up with a white kid, who grew up in the ghetto, they got that pass that they assume that they're black because they grew up around black people, and there's always that whether they're white or whether they multi-ethnical, they have biracial parents, and that's also the theme that I like that they added into this film, colorism, the light-skinned black person or the person who's not technically black but assume that they are black, and I'm like, this guy think he blacker than me. so it to me that scene was great, how it built up the conversation between those two. You get to learn about both characters in that one scene.
I think this is also something that shows like the structure of the US, where you basically have like parts of the city that are pretty much dominant by one culture, and that of course also if there are people of other skin color or other heritage in this part of the city, they will automatically be culturally assimilated within the dominant culture. In general, it's also very interesting with the US, since this is something that is not a lot mentioned in the US, but I think that a lot of people outside of the US see have this viewpoint in the US. So that white people in the US don't have anything in common anymore with Europeans.
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, because they formed their own culture, and it's also the same thing that black Americans, if they would visit Africa nowadays, you would also have like completely different lifestyles. At the university we also had some exchange students here from Ghana, and we also had students here from the US, and they were like, it's like we don't really have anything like in common, like and it's the same thing when I talk with an American German who is like fourth or fifth generation there, whereas like it's very interesting to see their perception of German culture, whereas like that's actually not really like how it is. But this is the very interesting thing about the US, since it's such a melting pot, and of course this also comes with a lot of problems, since it's always easier to have a functional ethno-state than to try to integrate different cultures into one state.
Yeah, it definitely have that problem, and America is like a melting pot for many various ethnic groups, and the civil rights era, there was not just about blacks, it was about a lot of ethnic groups, whether it was the Latins, the American Indian movement, and you had women rights, you had gay rights.
The natives always get fucked over the most, and also, in my opinion, like the only nationalist movement that has any legitimacy in the US would be actually the Native Americans.
Yeah, they're the one that still exists. When I looked it up, like a lot of them still band together. Their groups are still strong. Whereas our groups kind of got destroyed by the early 70s and never recovered from it.
Yeah.
and that's what makes this movie so important, is that's you're trying to start a new movement. After the loss of the leaders of the 60s, you're trying to restart this movement again, build a new nation. And I love how, one of the Cobras questioned him on this, like, why are we doing this? And he gave him a sophisticated answer. And it's all about, they can't police us and keep us on our ass for this so long. They gotta, bend. They gotta, put police elsewhere, and they're not gonna be keeping eyes on everything at the same time.
And I think it's also very important. Like, I think this is not mentioned in the movie, but what I thought about is like that it's also so much important to found your own state, and if you really want to have true freedom, because you also say, because it's a very also interesting historical example, like Liberia, which basically is like a puppet state in Africa by the US that they founded so they can send the black slaves back to Africa. But of course, it never was like a state that black people built for themselves.
No.
So I think it's always interesting. I think this is a topic that is way too little mentioned, like in America, like the state of Liberia.
And they're basically like, we want to be free. We want to have control of land. And the police are just there to protect the property, but not the people. And I thought that was a very interesting line when Freeman and Dawson talked later in the film. Like, you're not here to protect the people, you're here to protect the property.
Yeah.
And they look at that as saying, yeah, this is an important piece of property that we need to make sure we protect. But the people, yeah, because they're in the ghetto anyway, so they're going to be born criminals, which is always the case when it comes to black people that come from the ghetto. They're born criminals, and that's always been a stigma that's been placed on us, no matter what. Like, they always want to stereotype us and put us in a box, instead of saying, we can come out of that box and have, much more freedom if we had a better structure. But the government don't want that structure. They say, nah, you're going to put you in this box, going to keep you in this box, and make sure that you don't grow out to become nothing more than a statistic, whether it's in jail or being dead.
Yeah, and this is like also an example where the black community is used as a pawn again, because it's way easier to control a population that is divided than, of course, to control a population that has a direction. And it's always so interesting when today you hear the arguments of like, yes, before the law everybody has the same rights, etc., blah blah blah, yada yada yada. It's of course when you show, but do you give people the same opportunity, or it's like when you have a certain parts of the city where, like, especially like in a city where you basically want people to be criminals because you need them to be criminals so you can reach your political goal with them. You can have it either as the left use it as an example of we need like to change, but they didn't really want to change it because they always needed the example, or like the right in America says like we like if you don't vote for us, this is like what happens everywhere.
There was a small part in the film, and it led up to the riots, but the character of Shorty is dealing drugs, and he's actually in association with the cops. Like, the cops are supplying him the drugs to deal. And I remember watching the documentary, based on the Black Panthers and stuff. Like, after the civil rights movement and the destruction of the leaders of the 60s, the government planned, and this is part of the COINTELPRO stuff, they secretly planned to put more drugs in the black communities to keep us down, to say crime rates go up because now they're on drugs, they're dealing drugs. You got more liquor stores on every corner block to keep us from reading books. So there was a lot of things that was happening in the early 70s to say we're going to do everything in our power to make sure we keep these people in the box. We're going to throw drugs in the neighborhood. We're going to have the police say, hey, give them these drugs, or we'll plant drugs on something so we can lock them up.
The classic.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to talk to Dolomite next week.
Yeah.
We're going to talk that scene next week. But yeah, they always do things to try and stymize the black community to say we don't want no more Martin Luther Kings rising up and becoming this figure that they can look up to. And that's what this movie is trying to tell. And like I said, every time I watch this film, I need to read the book. I need to see if this character of Shorty was expanded on a little bit, because it's a huge part of the community when he gets killed in the movie.
Yeah.
I feel like watching this film, you get like 70% of the book, but you're gonna get more when you read the book.
Yeah,
it's always, we've said this in the past, like when it comes to the novels and the movies, some of the movies tend to be really great versions, but it's best to read the novel.
Yeah, you can never put that much character development in a movie. Like a movie, of course, being a multimedia, like voice, visuals, has its limits, what they can do, so the audience can stay concentrated. In a novel, since it only focuses like on your eyes, you can do way more and get away with it without having like a convoluted mess on your hand.
The scene where he's fighting, the training, the basic martial arts training, when he's fighting the guy who said, "We don't want you here," I love that scene.
Yeah,
because the guy straight up told him, "Man, enough with that humble shit. We don't need no yes sir man here. This is the CIA." And he challenged him to the judo throwing. And at first, Dan is like, "You're overwhelmed," but he calms himself. He doesn't have the typical anger of certain black men that when they're losing, they start to get a bit temperamental. He's calm, cool, and collected, and then he turns the tide. And I love how he completely dropped him in that last one. Like,
yeah,
it was so well done with the choreography and of the struggle and then the takedowns. But it's such a small scene, but yet an important scene.
Yeah, that was a really interesting one, since you can really see how his mind works, how he's studying every move, and he's learning from mistakes, and and then later turns it around. Exactly, Robert. History is very important. I'm like a big supporter of the quote by Heraclit, that you never step in the same river twice, because you're not the same man and it's not the same river. So history will never repeat itself exactly the way it was. But I do see that there's a lot of similarities you can apply, and you have to adapt. And that's the true challenge, like with history. When you study history, it's not about learning dates or like, this was this person said this. No, it's more about how to interpret historic sources and how to not even so much how to adapt like history for the modern times. This comes more like with something which is a very fantastic way. When you studied history, you can also function other jobs. Like I'm working now teaching like digital sales. So I apply a lot of sales strategies that have, or a lot of PR and propaganda that has been used in history, and just adapt it for the modern time. It still works the same. You just need a modern phrasing. But the importance of history is totally there, and it totally helps you to not repeating mistakes, which sadly we all do. We also talked about it in the past with the whole virus of unknown origin thing. Is people nowadays acted exactly as stupid as they did during the bubonic plague in the medieval ages, like, or with other plagues that plagued humankind. We're basically still the same humans that we were thousands of years ago. Only our technology changed, but we're still the same irrational meat puppets.
And that's the thing, like, that's why I love talking to you about these movies, because I get a historical context. We both learn, from each different backgrounds and histories. I get to learn about European history, and when we talked about the Nosferatu, we about the plague, and I mentioned, like, I remember reading up on the plague and stuff, and it's fascinating history that you get to read and learn about. So every movie we talk about, there's something that we learn about each culture and each part of the world, and that's the beauty of doing these live streams.
Thank you. Also, like, without you and without all of my American friends, like, if I would have watched this movie without knowing you, without knowing Al, this would have been a totally different experience, because there's a lot of things that I would not get. Because there's there's so much you can learn from books, but on the other hand, it's also very important to see how real people react. Of course, you always have to take in count that people are very subjective, like sources are very subjective. So you have to take that in account. But it's so important, because as a European, just from reading books, and I had several seminars on American history at the university. And I also wrote a paper how the US used 2 world wars to become a world power. And also one of my more provocative, but source-wise very true papers was that how the US bullied Japan in the Second World War. Because it totally did. Of course, you can always say, yeah, they had their reasons, etc. But yeah, it's so interesting, since of course we are getting through, especially through schools, like university nowadays are a fucking minefield. I'm very happy that I started before it was like a true communist nightmare. But it's really always interesting how history can be perceived or can be forged into something you want it to be.
And I want to go back to a word you mentioned, during your soliloquy, and that's propaganda.
Yeah.
Which plays a role in the film, because you got
Reginald Go.
Hey, you have been doing a fantastic job with your live streams. I am loving watching you, do your watch parties. The Beastmaster one, I have to rewatch that, but man, I watched that movie the same time, and I was like, God, I love the Beastmaster movie, man. But I'm glad you're here. Yes.
Absolutely. But she forgot to put the hammer on her action stars list before 2004.
She was disgusted at herself about that, man. But yes, definitely check this movie out. It's on YouTube. The Spook Who Sat by the Door, and we are enjoying this conversation because it's a great film, and it's a film that turned 50 years old, but it's a film that needs to be discussed.
Yeah, you won't find it on Blu-ray in your local Target.
No. But yes, propaganda.
Yeah.
One thing I learned watching the films on the Black Panthers is how COINTELPRO, which was created by the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, used propaganda as a way to discredit and to dissemble the Black Panther Party movement, along with, all these views on Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, create all this false information to start a divide between the camps. In the movie, they use propaganda as a code word to tell the people we're fighting for the community, and to, inform them that the Black guerrilla fighters, the Black freedom fighters, are doing this because we're tired of being oppressed by these racist pigs who are harassing and taking control of the community when we need to fight back. And I love the whole system breakdown of what they're doing and how they fall in line with their leadership.
Yeah, it's also interesting, like the term propaganda by itself, how it turned from a normal word, a regular word that was just used as persuasion, and now it's basically this derogative term that is used basically along with manipulation.
Yeah.
While by itself propaganda is neither good nor bad, it's a tool. And
that's exactly what it is, a big tool.
And there's also one thing there, and it works so well because people are not rational. There's a wonderful book by Dan Ariely, but what's the English name again? What is it again? Let me see. I think I have it here somewhere. Like the German version is like, it's predictably irrational. Predictably irrational is the book. It's a book I really recommend everybody to read because it shows how irrational we are while thinking we're rational. And this is also nothing new, because when you go back into the Greek antique times, when rhetorics became like it's their own field. And one, of course, of the biggest speakers and rhetoricians is Aristotle. And Aristotle, he founded like his treatise, like there's only three things you can persuade a person. This is ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos is like the character of the speaker. Like, when you enter a room, people automatically have a bias, either good or bad. This can you use, or this you have to overcome. Then you have pathos. Pathos are the emotions. Like, how can I emotionally touch the people? And then you have logos. Logos are like the facts. Okay, how can I use facts to persuade? And these three are like ingredients for a meal. It depends to who you speak, in what situation you speak. You, for some speech, you can say, okay, I'm gonna use like a pint of like pathos, and I use more of facts. There was only one thing that Aristotle was incorrect. Aristotle said back in the day that logos is the supreme way to persuade somebody, which of course would be good if this would be the case, but actually it turned out that pathos is way more effective short term for sure, because people are emotional, people are irrational. So it's very good to know that like this three, like your character, your emotions, and of course facts, you have to mix them into a really good stew and you really have to use it for each person, for each group differently.
Mm-hmm. That was a nice breakdown of it, and it definitely ties with this movie, you know, and especially the emotional aspect, because where Dan is more subdued and is a thinker, he does get emotional, especially when it's around Joy.
Yeah.
And that's where he had to catch himself, and by that point she had already figured that out, that he is secretly behind the black gorillas because of how he's so defending them. And you know what? Another thing I love about how this film depicts, you know, how the city is struggling, is how when the National Guard comes in after the riots, and you know they are just hounding the ghetto. I like when the FBI, the CIA agents are talking about how the National Guard being there is crippling the city because of how majority of the jobs that work in the city are basically Negroes. You know, garbage men, bus drivers, the hospital. You know, a lot of these guys work those jobs, and because they can't go to the job because of the curfews and the whole National Guard being there putting a tight leash on the ghetto, the city is struggling. And that's another facet that don't really get talked about, is the struggle of the economical warfare of the city.
Exactly. That was a really good point. And this was also something, of course, that the protagonist knew and he very much used for his sake, for his goals. And yeah, it's interesting because really because the system like is flawed and it crippled itself by that.
Yeah, and most like movies kind of gloss over that, but when you really think about it, like, yeah, the city will take economical hit, you know, without its workers there, without the people going out to do their shopping, you know. And Joy brought up that was one of the reasons why she wasn't a supporter of the gorillas, because it's affecting her customer,
livelihood,
it's affecting her business. You know, her husband, who's a doctor, got let go because you know they can't have him come in there if all this National Guard stuff is coming down on him in the neighborhood that he lives in, so he can't go to work. And I like that Dan even mentioned this during the pool hall scene, where you know, if the people ain't supporting us, then it's almost like a lost cause. But if they choose the outside, then you know they're going to be behind us. You know, and he sees the differences in that. Like, you need the people to be behind you in order for you to continue going, because that's how you gain more numbers. That's how you gain more followers.
Yeah, and it's also like, you know, when you use this tactic, it can backfire, but usually it doesn't because people don't think that far. But like on the one hand, when you create an environment where people lose their jobs, which is actually they're losing it because of your actions, but you turn it around and say, like, you know, it's like the enemy's fault, and now you have to join me because you lost everything else. It's also it's a good recruiting strategy.
and his recruiting strategy was to spread all over the country, not just in Chicago.
Yeah.
You know, he wanted chapters in New York, New Orleans, Los Angeles, every big market city that he can get. And, you know, and if they went to jail, recruit in jail. You know, that's the form basis of building a guerrilla warfare group, is that you have to continuously recruit new people and to motivate.
I hope you don't have a later visit today from the FBI.
We're just talking the film, but if I get assassinated, man, then we know why.
Yeah.
But again, like this film definitely, and this is what the author Sam Greenlee wanted. He wanted you to think. He wanted you to not only watch this film or read his book, but he wanted you to have a mindset of thinking about, you know, what he went through during his time, and what the time period that they had to live through. And it does give you the pause and think.
Mhm.
Now that doesn't mean that you should take action and say, I'm gonna do exactly what this movie tells me to do. But I think the movie does have you think about the certain situations that Dan Freeman goes through, and that what he's trying to build.
Yeah, and I think that's always very important really to mention, is that that you can totally watch something which you don't agree with, but you want to know about it. You want to see how it's done, like as a movie, or even like why this person comes to this conclusion. And in my opinion, it's so important to also read stuff that you're not comfortable with, because otherwise you're just repeating stuff that other people say about something without really knowing the source. It's the same, I absolutely despise communism, but I have read Marx, because how can you be against something if you don't know what it is about?
Exactly. You gotta understand the enemy. You
That
hate,
too, yeah.
you hate communism, but at the same time, you want to know about it to give a better understanding of why you despise it.
Exactly,
So
because
when somebody asks you the question why you hate communism, and you just say, "Well, I just hate it for what
Yeah.
you stand for," it is like, well, you ain't explain, you ain't give me an answer.
Yeah, like why did I hate communism? It's like because they all have weird beards, even the women.
But yeah, you got to have a solid foundation to have a great explanation, and that's why Dan does he has a great explanation for certain things when people ask him questions of why he wants to do this.
Yeah,
and he presses Willie on making sure you get that education. Don't just think that diploma or that paper is just a number. Nah, you need the education. Smarten yourself up.
and this is something that I think that is one of the most important. Is like one of the positive messages of the movie, which is one of the the most legal advices from the movies. Really, it's very important to to never just lean back and let life pass by. Always try to improve. Learn new things. And even if maybe you're not happy with it, then you can always change your course. But I've said so many stupid things when I was young, but I don't regret anything, because everything brought me to the person that I'm here now. And sometimes it's important to learn stuff, even that you don't like.
Exactly. And during the whole thing with what's really set the riots off, besides Shorty getting killed by the police, was them bringing those dogs. And if you've seen all the historical footage of them using dogs on black people, you know how the dogs really affect the community when they see them, because it's tied to history. And when Dawson saw that, he was like, "Get them dogs out of here." He was willing to shoot the dogs to get that message across. Like, why are you bringing dogs in the neighborhood? Oh, because the boss said bring dogs.
Yeah. Hey, Trev.
What's up, Trev? It's just mind-boggling that you're gonna send dogs in the neighborhood that's already under hostile tension. And Dawson was ready. He was ready to move the troop out.
Because it's because it's so crazy when you actually think back about the use of dogs. Usually they were also used in antique times. I think in Celtic tribes, to unleash at your enemy and to disrupt the enemy and then move like your armies in and shit. So it's also basically a military strategy that also shows really how you view the people you unleash the dogs as.
What's up,
Hey,
Damien?
Damien.
Yeah, the reason why you haven't heard this movie before because it's been kind of swept under a rug, and while it's been mentioned for the last couple of years, it's still kind of a hidden movie. But it's on YouTube, and it's based on the novel by Sam Greenlee. Same name, The Spook Who Sat by the Door. If you have the opportunity, give it a watch, and check out the novel if you can. But it's definitely an important film. It's an important film from a days gone by, and
Yeah.
I think it was important that we talk about it.
Yeah, and besides it being like a historical significant film, it's also a well-crafted movie. It's not a masterpiece. You can see, of course, where it lacks a certain the budget, and maybe it does not even always have the most defined pacing and editing, but it's still a movie where I was not bored watching it. And you have a certain thriller, elements in there, as well as a little bit of action. Lots of it, of course, is more drama, but it's really like an entertaining movie that would be it would be more talked about if it would be different, but also then it would be way less significant.
Yeah, and considering that the budget they had and the issues they ran into, and when the film did come out, it got yanked from theaters after like 2 weeks. So yeah, the movie really had a lot going against it, but it needed to happen.
Yeah,
Same
this
with the book.
this is also so interesting, how you can hollow out the freedom of speech within a country that has the freedom of speech basically in its amendment. It's of course they can say what they want, but we just don't give you the platform to say it.
Let's talk about some of the scenes that the film had, like the robbery of the bank, and how that was. What I like about that scene is that they all went in there. He got all the light-skinned brothers, and they went in there dressed up like mafia guys.
Yeah.
And I was like, such a genius move, because they wouldn't. If the Cobras would have robbed it would have been a botched job. But he's like, I can't have the Cobras tied to it, so I'm gonna get all the light-skinned guys, that
with hairdos,
hairdos and all. And I even like how after they completed the robbery, they picking out their hair with the afro combs and stuff to make sure they back puffy and stuff.
Yeah.
But the attention to detail of having them rob the bank looking like mafia guys, and then the radio call says the bank was robbed by 6 Caucasians, and then they get a laugh out of that. I was like, genius. Like, I hope people don't get ideas like that.
No, but it's
help but laugh.
Yeah, because this is things that works, because during a robbery, etc., everything, or during any event that is very forceful and very fast, you don't really have the time to look exactly at everything. It's like a rush. And of course, then you just pick on certain characteristics, and if the clothes and the hair fits, then you don't look so much at the facial features. So it's really also like a very well thought through scene that totally makes sense in a practical way. What I also really liked about the movie is that this, which was a little bit weird because if the CIA was involved, but shouldn't be like more the FBI be involved if it's inside the States, and the CIA is more for operation outside the States.
It definitely, like, the CIA and the FBI work like hand to hand together, Central Intelligence and informants. But I do think that, like, the scene where the CIA agents are talking about the whole situation in Chicago.
Now I get why it's CIA. not only to have the continuity from the beginning, but also because they assumed that, of course, it must be the Soviet Union,
Yes.
that got like an agent in that was giving the inner city youth ideas.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing, it's even throughout history, with civil rights, they always saw it as, commies. Like communism was infecting the blacks, and now they want to do this thing and stuff. And they always want to assume that it's a Russian spy.
Yeah.
I laughed at that because I'm like, they know of Dan Freeman. They know that he went back to Chicago to become a social worker. And all these social uprisings is in Chicago, and yet they want to assume that's a Russian spy giving all these Negroes information on how to fight.
Yeah, because he was so smart to really hide in plain sight.
Exactly, and that's the genius of the character. The other scene that I thought was great, and it had a little funny part, was when they robbed the military base of its arms.
Yeah.
It was so well sophisticated, such a great plan. And then they had a bus to carry all the equipment. Mm-hmm. And then while they were getting out of there and they driving the bus with one of the military vehicles, they come to a red light. And the lady automatically say, "Open the door." She wouldn't get on the bus. I was like, "Damn it, lady, you gonna fuck up everything." And then the cops come, and then they like, "Oh, cops!" They get ready to arm themselves just in case. And the cops is like, "Lady, don't you read the sign that says out of service?" And then they like, "Woo!"
Yeah,
got off on that. But I thought that was such a well done scene with how they planned their infiltration and stealing all the stuff.
Now, all this stuff was very well executed. This is also probably one of the reasons why they pulled it out of the cinemas, because it was too well executed.
It was too well executed. It's like, man, we don't need ideas forming in these young black kids' minds if they see this film. So what were the other things that came to your attention when watching the film?
Yeah, like I said, mostly was that how the CIA and how like the National Guard and all the American institutions were so blind on their home front eye, so they expected, of course, it must be something like outside interfering, because it's like the people we have oppressed since so many decades, like they are not capable of that.
They're not gonna think it was us because they think we stupid.
Yeah. So that was this was one of the things in the movie where first I thought, okay, it's a little bit too much on the eye. It could have been done a little bit more subtle, but then I thought, no, actually, that's what I said to you, because it's basically the total different way around than it would be like in an US patriotic movie, where all the enemies of the US act stupid and are inefficient. And here it's like the National Guard and the CIA who fall into that role. So actually, I thought that was really like funny. This reminds me of a movie that I've seen. It's a Turkish movie. What was it called? Das dunkle Tal. It's like a movie where the Americans are the evil ones that, of course, are infiltrating like the Near East, etc., and killing civilians. So it was very interesting to see a movie where some, I think, was this the Turkish elite soldier that just offed so many American Marines, where while in other movies, in American movies, of course, it's always so interesting when you see how effective the U.S. Army is.
And the National Guard is like caught off guard, and they're not even winning by a mile. Like they're getting hard.
Yeah. So this is very interesting, and this also shows how how you can really set an expectation of an army with movies, and how often movies, even though they have like the label anti-war movie on them, and they're still very much showing like the own army, which is understandable. Like I totally get that, but it shows like the army, like in a very glorious light,
Mm-hmm.
which is also so interesting, since when you had like when you were like in Afghanistan and Iraq, it was a strange war because the technology was so much bigger than the armies there. So the enemy didn't have like the artillery power to, of course, you had street fights there, but to really, it was not a real warfare like between two industrial nations. And you can see like how many US Americans reported that volunteered to fight for the Ukraine against Russia. And even though they were veterans of Afghanistan and the Iraq, that they wanted to go back immediately because Russia has artillery. And basically, when you then realize there is no peaceful spot behind the enemy lines because the artillery can reach you. And you can basically just die in your sleep by having an artillery battery like unleash at you. So I think this is also where a lot of American soldiers witnessed that, which their grandfathers also, our old grandfathers had to witness that war is not fun.
No. And while the war waged in the film is not fun, especially for the city of Chicago.
It is also something that I really liked. Also, was Freeman was mentioning, when the other guy said, he hate like white people. He said, this is not the reason.
Yes.
It's like, because, and this is something because I think that hate to despise something is never a good reason to do something. If you want to do something, you have to do it out of the love of something. Only that way it can be long lasting. And he also says, like he didn't glorify the violence that he did. He was like, it was a necessary evil.
Plus, hate can cloud your mind.
Yeah, that too.
If you go into something just focus on hate, then you're gonna lose your goal and you're gonna be completely unfocused on the main objective, because you're just focused on the hate. Oh, I hate white people. So you're thinking of, I'm gonna shoot every white person I see, and I'm like, bro, that's not the point of what we're doing this.
Yeah, and it's like they also have examples from history. For example, like the French Revolution is like the moments they killed off the aristocracy, they started turning on themselves and beheading themselves because it was only forced by hatred.
Yeah. That was one that I was going to go back to, the whole point of hate. Like I said, that whole sequence when him and Willie was talking is probably one of my favorite scenes, because you get so much, from him Dan talking about how his grandmother couldn't read and how important reading was to him, and the whole hatred of white folk, that this is not about hate. This is about gaining the freedom of land and being free. But if you let hate cloud your judgment, that's going to ruin you. You might as well just step off.
Yeah. Why do you think higher education is not free in the US?
Oh, sweet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, we definitely going to be reading the novel, because there's a lot of layers to this film. One disappointment I do have, and it comes at the end of the film. I love the whole Dawson Freeman thing, but I felt that Dawson came to such a quick conclusion that we didn't get no in between. Joy told Dawson about what she experienced from Freeman with the argument and how he was siding with the guerrillas. And then next you know, we see Dawson in Freeman's apartment arresting him because he said he listened to the tapes, and he said, "Oh, that's you. That's your voice." And I'm like, I kind of wish we would have gotten a little bit more in between for him to come to that conclusion. the setup was still it was still done well, and you kind of felt for Dawson because he is a really good character. But I just felt like there was they could have gotten a couple more minutes of explanation of Dawson doing some research.
Yeah, like what I've gotten from the summary, from the synopsis of the book, I think there was a little bit more focus on that in the book, but I get it with the movie's running time. It also ends very abruptly.
Yeah. I mean, the ending was ambiguous because they want to set up like, Code Red, we're going full bore with this. But I just felt like the Dawson thing was kind of rushed.
Yeah.
Like, from him going talking to Joy to instantly, wanting to arrest Freeman, I was like, we could have gotten a little in between there. And I do feel like the novel did a better job of building that up.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that doesn't take away the phenomenal performance of that scene.
Yeah, that was because this was really a scene where it's a very classical motif. Like in history when you have like the classic fights on two sides, when brother fights brother, when father fights son, when friends fights friend, because they're on different sides, and it's such a classic scene. When one kills the other, not because they want to, but because they had to in this situation. And this was very well done in this case.
Yeah, the entire scene was well done, and the explanation afterwards when the guys come in and say, "You killed Dawson," and stuff like, well, he's gonna be in the way, and you can't let even your best friend cannot be in the way of what my goal is. There's so much to unpack with this film, and I really can't wait to dive into the novel, because I feel like the novel is going to give me even more clear explanations of what the author is truly trying to tell me.
Yeah, and to go back to the beginning, when you mentioned that this is sorry, this is very often mentioned like as a blaxploitation movie. I don't see it as a blaxploitation movie either. And it's interesting because the novel basically was the inspiration for the blaxploitation genre, but it was more like, if you could see it could be like a proto blaxploitation movie. But yeah, I would also not put it into that genre.
Yeah, because it is completely different from every other blaxploitation film, and it has a message, and it's very political.
Yeah, and it's not smooth, because one of the adjectives I would give most blaxploitation movies is like smooth.
And I will say, I enjoyed the score by Herbie Hancock. I love the different themes that he used throughout, and the closing theme was like one of my favorites, and it really like fit this era of political warfare, and trying to keep a funky groove while also having some sinister moments when it comes to the music.
Yeah, the score was pretty good. Yeah.
But yeah, overall, it's a movie that I highly recommend. I hope I don't get assassinated, but but this is a film that was worth talking, and especially considering that this film turns 50 this year, I think it was much appropriate that it was talked about on our channel.
Yeah. It's very interesting also like to see it from an outside point of view as a European, where I think it's way easier to watch it as a European as a movie, or like it's way easier to watch it as a non-American as a movie, because of course when you watch it as an American, like you can either feel for the one side, or you can get really offended by it probably.
And that's why it was important for me to like send you extra video just to get that proper context of the history behind it. Whether Sam Greenlee's interview, and we didn't even talk about Robert Townsend and how he was inspired to do his own film, and all for his own money. So, and it was inspiration based off of this movie.
Yeah, it's a very important piece of American movie history, especially since with not only like as the movie itself, but with all the stuff that was around that movie, that was put out of the cinemas. And like we said in the beginning, it's like the antithesis of A Birth of a Nation, which even ties it deeper into American film history. It would be even. Maybe you would start a civil war, but if we make like a double feature, like in American cinemas.
But yeah, it definitely was a movie worth watching, and again, you know, when watching this film, it took me back to watching some of those documentaries on civil rights movements, and like you could see the buildup of the tension, and that this movie was like an answer to a lot of that.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm really happy that you proposed this movie, because like otherwise, I don't think this would be something that would have been on my watching list, because like this is not a movie that you see on any on any list to watch it. So it's very interesting, and I really feel that my cinematic knowledge has been improved by this film, and I'm already losing my voice here.
Yeah, me too. But that's the beauty of doing these videos together, because you introduced me to films that I never watched that was overseas, you know, and I've enjoyed, you know, discussing them with you. So, you know, that's the beauty of getting together and talking films that pretty much nobody really heard of. You know, and we inspired Sleepy Reader to download the novel, and he'll check out the film as well. So,
and despite being on painkillers, I'm very happy that you got a proper discussion out of it.
Yeah, but I won't hold you any further. You know, knowing that them painkillers are putting you to work. But I want to thank Go ahead.
Yeah, I hope that next week everything is like no more toothache.
Next week will be we'll close the month out on a happy, funny note, because next week we're gonna talk Dolomite. So we'll be back in the Black's exploitation, but in the more comedic side.
Yeah.
Rudy Ray Moore's goodness. We're also gonna talk the Eddie Murphy movie, My Name is Dolomite,
which was so fantastic.
Yes. So we'll close out the month on a good note, but hopefully I'll make it to next week. So. And we'll be joined by Dusty Brick Brown. Al will join us next week, and we're gonna have a great time.
Thank you, Retronautical.
Yes.
Yeah, I was at the dentist this week, and my nerve is still very much irritated and face a little bit swollen.
Thank you, Retro Nerd Girl. I even said in one of her live chats, like, if we can get her on for one of these movie discussions, it would be awesome.
Yeah, you're always welcome here. Like, I really hope that we can once make a stream together.
Yeah, I know our different time zones kind of like throw everything off.
Yeah. Time zones are crazy.
Yeah. So that for me and VV, we just want to say have a great Friday and have a great weekend.
And they're also very important. This is it was a movie discussion. Don't start any riots.
Don't start nothing. You know, don't get no ideas. You know, we were just here talking the movie. Yeah. So later, y'all.
Be peaceful, everybody. Okay, bye-bye.